For those of you who are joining us for the first time for 2022, on behalf of the Brahma Kumaris, our best, warmest wishes for you for improved health and much success for this year. My name is Divendri. I'm a teacher of meditation with the Brahma Kumaris, and I'm actually based in a small meditation center in an area called Musgrave in Durban. And it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And I have the opportunity of introducing you to our session as well as to our speaker. I'm sure you took a look at our flyer, and as interested as I am in today's topic, which is about planning, setting objectives, and achieving them in 2022. And what I was particularly struck by when I received a briefing about this workshop is about how this process is designed specifically to support us in being able to integrate our plans and objectives into the context of the COVID pandemic, because I'm sure, like myself, you as well have needed to really adapt and adjust in many ways. But of course, we still do hold our aims and our objectives very close to ourselves, and would like to continue and to move forward in the best way possible. And so it would be very interesting today to hear from our speaker as to his insights into how we can do this. So facilitating our workshop today is Farooq Wajah. Farooq is an entrepreneur, and he's got a background in marketing, strategy, and technology. He's got extensive experience in the corporate sector as a company practitioner and as an external advisor. He now works with companies in helping them to achieve their profit objectives by leveraging digital technology in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's very interesting, because all of us had to sort of step up and get into the digital world with COVID, with the onset of COVID. Farooq also studies musical composition and improvisation, and he's also a professional photographer. Just on a personal note, I want to share with you that I met Farooq and his family. I was thinking about it actually this afternoon. Now it's 2 decades ago. It doesn't seem that long, but it's actually 2 decades ago when I was living in the meditation center in Observatory. And that was when I met Farooq and his family. And it's always been lovely to share a friendship with him. And Farooq actually has a podcast, which is very interesting, called Sensibility. And I can't think of a more appropriate title than Sensibility, because when you listen to any of the topics that he takes up, it's very, very practical, very refreshing. And the word that I would choose to actually describe the content is that it's really sensible. So it's a very, very appropriate title for that podcast. It's interesting and you can check it out. And he often, as a photographer and videographer, sends me little clips on WhatsApp of nature scenes that footage of nature scenes, as well as beautiful pictures of flora and fauna. And it's always lovely to receive any piece of information or any imagery from Farooq, because I find it very insightful and meaningful. Farooq's one person, when I receive a message from him, I actually take the time to read further and to think about the type of things that he shares, because I feel that the content is always very relevant. And so that's the reason why I'm particularly looking forward to today's workshop. I already have this feeling in my heart that it's going to be very, very useful, very constructive. And the thing about spirituality is that it's really never divorced from the lives that we are living. You know, a huge part of spirituality for me is about authenticity and integration of all of the spiritual concepts that we hold dear to us in a way that we actually add value to our lives and bring new meaning to our lives. And I see this workshop as an opportunity for us to really move closer towards that authenticity and integration of spirituality in our entire year 2022 by setting those objectives and starting the process of planning and integrating in that way. So without further ado, I want to now hand over to Farooq. Warm welcome to you, Farooq. And I really love this background that you're sitting in. You're looking extremely relaxed there, so I'm a bit jealous. Tell us a little bit about where you are before you start your process today.
Thank you, Divan. I'm at the Perry's Bridge Trading Post in Hazyview, which is about the quietest place I could find. And the only thing I didn't consider were the mosquitoes. So if you see me go like this during my chat, you know what it's all about. But it's just a little garden in the boutique hotel, which I thought was quite a nice, calm environment. So thank you for that introduction. I wish my mother could have heard that. It was lovely.
I think it's recorded, so you can play it to her the next time you visit her.
So, you know, you mentioned the podcast, and it was something that I started because Rosina and Ilham live separately from each other and also separately from me. One's overseas, one's in Johannesburg.
Rosina and Ilham are Farooq's daughters.
The thing I miss most about the old days was when we finished having dinner and we broke out into a discussion about something. And the pandemic left a lot of us with time, but also space between us, which I tried to close. So that was the objective for doing that.
Okay.
And a lot of my close friends often remark and they say to me, I'm too serious. And I say, well, that's because I'm discussing serious issues. You know, I'm not a comedian and this is not a stand-up comedy thing. I'm talking about something serious. So Royden in particular, a friend of mine in KZN, will always rip anything I do, whether it's a video or a podcast, he rips it to shreds, and I can always rely on him for a very honest and interrogated reaction or response to what I do online. So this is a message. So I think getting into today's session.
Farooq, just before you continue, I'm going to stop my video and a camera and a mic now, and then you can feel free to start sharing your screen, etc., when you wish to. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I don't have a screen to share. I have about 8 slides, which I did in the form of some notes, but the notes are mainly to prompt me and keep me on track. And I'm happy to share that with anyone during or after the session. But I felt that this was a discussion and a dialogue, so I'm hoping to get through my session a little quicker so that we can get into questions, answers, and the session becomes a little more interactive. I think people are tired of being told what to do. They're tired of being lectured, and the pandemic has left us in a state of confusion. And there's a song that comes to mind with the title Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. And I think that pretty much sums up where most of us are today. So I thought to perhaps start the session with how I classify and how I've divided people into groups. And I think it was Casey Stengel who said there are 3 types of people. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened or ask what happened. And I've just simplified that into two groups of people that I encounter or have encountered over the last 2 years. And those are the wishful thinkers, and they probably comprise about 80% of the population. And then there are the hopeful. And I'd like to just maybe chat for a minute around the difference between what that actually means. And hope, I define as the belief that the future will be better than the present, but with an understanding that we have a very active role to play in bringing about that change from where we are right now to something better in the future. Wishful is similar, but with the acceptance or more, I think, the kind of submission that things will be better. I just have to wait for them to improve. And that's why it's called a wish. So I'd separate the two groups of people, the wishful and the hopeful, into a kind of 80-20. And if we look at what characterizes, let's start with the wishful people. They are often reactive, they're resistant to change, they're lacking in self-confidence, and generally are inclined to blame other people or external factors for whatever they are experiencing in their lives. And that may sound like a harsh assessment, but just in the interaction between myself and customers over the last 2 years, I've seen some of my customers close down completely. I've seen others who have just gone on holiday and said to me, I'll be back when things improve or return to normal. And I've seen a few that have really battled to grasp what the changes mean and how to reinvent themselves, which is a topic of one of my podcasts, because I think you can't be the same person all the time. You need to continually reinvent yourself. And that has allowed me the opportunity to do work for them in slightly different ways, but also measure the results in a very real world environment. So those are the kind of inputs that I've had when I defined these two groups of people. And the hopeful people, and I'd like to include many of the people gathered around their screens today in the hopeful group, are either active or proactive. So they're not waiting for things to change. And they realize that they have a role to play, and that hope is the beginning of a process rather than something at the end of a time frame that we anticipate it'll take for things to improve. So that kind of sets the scene for where I'd like to take the session, and I'd like to break it down into the practicality of where we're talking about things today. The timing is perfect. And I think most of us know what it's about when we make New Year's resolutions. And many of us, including myself, for many years, if I look back in the past, have set unrealistic goals. And because we don't see immediate results, we very quickly get into a disillusioned state. And it can range from a few days to a week to a month. And by February, we're already looking forward to next January, where we can start all over again. And when I talk about results, let's assume that one of your New Year's resolutions was to become a little more fit, more physically active, and to join a gymnasium. Now, the first thing you need to do is pay for a membership, and they're not cheap today. You need to buy new clothing, and the list of things on your shopping list quickly grows into something that you're not budgeted for, and you've spent money on it. So you're already beginning to feel the pain financially. Now you engage with your personal trainer and you start your first session. And when you get home, if you look in the mirror, you see no results at all. So now you're poorer, you're already feeling disillusioned after all the hard work, and you're already tending to go towards the negative side of things because there wasn't an understanding from your side that you need to embark on a process. And if, for example, one of your New Year's resolutions was to lose weight, you can't do it immediately. It's something that happens over a period of time. It wasn't a doable thing. So let's look at some of the ways in which we can take a New Year's resolution, a personal goal, or a business objective, and turn it into something that is achievable. Because that is something that I believe will take us through an entire year and end the year on a high or a positive note where we can actually measure the results. And I start off by saying that planning actually equals meditating. If you think about the word meditation, and I think the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as the following: to spend time in quiet thought for religious purposes or relaxation. Now, we're not here today for religious purposes or to relax. We're here to do something active, positive, and engaging. So the first thing I would like to suggest, and again, you don't have to take notes. I've got all of this typed out already, so happy to email it to you or send it to you over WhatsApp. The first thing you need to do is to keep things real. To set an achievable goal requires some thoughtful and deliberate thought about the actions required to achieve something. So you can't just say, well, I'd like to do A, B, or C. It requires some understanding of what that involves, what the cost is, and also what effort is required. And if it's not achievable, if you go back to my previous example about joining the gym, the disillusionment quickly sets in and it begins to affect your personality. So when you set something achievable, often in business, people will say you should under promise and over deliver. And I've thought about that a great deal. And it's not a question about pleasing your boss or pleasing a partner or pleasing your parents. Yes, that does happen to a certain extent in business where people, and somebody has actually said this to me when we were doing a forecasting and budgeting exercise. The person said to me, Farouk, we have to show the bosses that things are getting better in the future. And I thought it was quite funny at the time, but I think it was only years later that I understood what the person actually meant and where they were coming from. But to my mind, and having exercised and practiced this, if you set a realistic goal and you achieve it or you slightly overachieve, after 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, you already begin to feel like an overachiever. So your confidence level increases. And for me, that's the most important thing that you require in order to set successive goals and objectives. So they need to be achievable. And very often, what we do is get caught in the thick of thin things. It's a Covey statement from one of his books. And I think what we need to do in thinking about achievability, keeping things real, is to keep unpacking our goals, to keep unpacking them into doable, achievable things so that they become smaller and smaller in size. And less do they appear as things that are insurmountable. So if you have an objective that you would like to lose weight, again, I come back to that simple example because it's a big New Year's resolution for many people. especially because we've all come out of the pandemic having eaten too much, including myself. So what you do is don't say, I would like to lose X kilos. Take it over a period of time and say, over this year, what I'd like to do is move from size that to size this. And that will require that I change my dietary habits, that I engage in certain physical activities, make certain lifestyle adjustments, and you can now start to see that a whole lot of actions start to flow out of those little things. And even when it comes to lifestyle adjustments, you might decide I might have dinner a little earlier, or I might shrink my sleep time or nap time, or I won't eat before I do this, or I'll take a walk after I've had breakfast, whatever it might be. But it needs to be something which is actionable. So achievable, actionable, and realistic are the three takeaways from all my rambling over the last few minutes. And I think coming back to making a plan, you need to actualize this. So you start to think about it, you start to visualize yourself as the thinner person or the more productive person, or whichever habit you were trying to change. And you reduce that to a plan, and a plan is the thing that negates the wishfulness about how we do things. So it's no longer, I wish things would change, or I wish that would move from point A to point B. It becomes, how do I achieve this? Am I on track? And when you start to measure your results, you quickly see that you've scored points, and that energizes the process going forward. So the planning part of it and the meditative part of it has to do with planning it first and then implementing it, not just jumping into the doing of what we have set out to do. And now that we've established a plan and a base from which to move forward, the most important thing is that we exercise and call on our creativity. And creativity, I've learned recently, is just a tool. And the three things that I'm going to give you in terms of creativity, and I'm going to join in innovation because that's also a business term. People often talk in business circles about creativity and innovation, is we need to start doing things differently to the way we've done them in the past. We need to start doing different things. And think about that for a minute. And in order to do those things, we require a great deal of courage, because none of us like change. We love routine, and I'm one of those that does things to such an extent that even when I go to a mall, I park in the same bay, often arriving at the same time. So many of us can understand and identify with that. So if you're making notes during this session, start with what you're going to do differently, and start with what you're going to do that you haven't done before. Those will start to highlight the efficiencies and how effective you're likely to be going into the change process. And a lot of us coming out of the pandemic have had our offices thrust into our homes. And it's now no longer a question of how do you balance my work and personal lives, but it's more an issue now of how the two blend and how we manage the overlaps of our professional and personal parts of our lives. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how we do that either in an organization or personally for ourselves. I think having emerged, and I'm one of those that believe the end of the pandemic is in sight. And that's not just optimistic view. I believe it, and I've been following it. It's been an interest area of mine. I've been following it very closely. And if you look at the most recent variant, I'm hoping that this will bring on board all of the people who've resisted it and start to see some gains in the world, which we really need. So coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that we've learned is that medically, people are not as qualified as we thought they were. There are many things doctors don't know, scientists don't know. And if you look at the amount of misinformation, even today, there are even medical professionals who can't agree and who don't send out the same message. And what we need to take away from that is that we are in a learning phase, whether this is to do with the pandemic or anything else. But there are no textbooks, there are no YouTube videos, there are no courses at any university which tell you how to successfully get through the epidemic. It's the first time that we've gone through it. So when you embrace learning as a part of your attitude, what that says is that immediately we are going to change our culture, and that things out there, challenges that require our creativity, that require our thought, are not things that there's a right answer for. There are wrong things that we can do, and everyone highlights those, but there are no answers in any book. We've got to go through this, and the ones that are going to be the most successful are those that have an ability to learn and adapt quickly. So I made two notes about the learning. One of the things that I'm particularly good at is making mistakes. And I can give you a long list of people who attest to that fact. But you have to get used to it. It's something you need to get used to when you embark on a learning process, because you just cannot get everything right all the time. And rewarding mistakes is not something that is easily done in our society. If you look at our education process, a lot of our schooling has to do with us taking examinations, and you get marked right or wrong. If you get it right, you pass. If you get it wrong, you fail. And that happens throughout our lives. People are constantly looking to see whether you get things right. So I'm here to say to you, you need a culture that rewards not only yourself making mistakes, but that rewards individuals in your organization as well. So you can't be pointing fingers and say they did this or this department got that wrong. You need to embrace the change and the learningness of what we're going to do throughout your organization at various levels. And when you examine the old ways of doing things and embarking on this process of doing new things or trying different things, you can't just in an organization say, well, we'll start to learn. You require a plan for that as well. And I'll cover that in a few minutes. But I think when you look at what you need to do differently, you can't just willy-nilly go forward and try new things. You need to look back, and you need to take a very critical view of what it is that you need to change or try to do differently. So it's just a spider on my screen. So in an organization, if you look at how you practically implement something like this, I think there are a few things that I'd like to highlight. Firstly, it needs to be supported from the top going down the organization. You can't initiate this kind of cultural change from lower down in the organizational ranks. It needs to be something that leaders decide they're going to do because they have no option. The other option is just to join the 80% of people and hope things get back to normal. And I think when you support learning, what you're really doing is opening a Pandora's box, because everyone is now feeling exposed and everyone's going to feel that the eyes are on them and everything is under scrutiny. So that cultural change, when you embark on a learning process, will start to require that you act very differently in your organization in terms of how you recruit people, how you reward people, and how people are remunerated, because that is going to determine what kind of people you bring into the organization in the future. And I think one of the things that we need to be very cognizant of is that people have never been rewarded for failure. And failure for me is the making mistake part of it in the past. And we've got to be careful that we just don't reward people for failing, but that learning is the key objective, and an understanding that failure is a part of learning. And I often use Apple as an example of this. If you look at the way in which the organization has progressed to a point, to the point that they are at right now, the iPhone and the iPod and the iPad and all of those things are the result of years and years of work, years of failure, to a point where Steve Jobs didn't even have any money, and was fired from Apple. Very interesting story to look at. And again, the timing is important. The culture that you develop is important. And Apple today is a learning organization. They're not innovative in any way. They are not first to the market with anything. But what they are very good at is taking something that someone else has done and improving on it. So when I use the word learning, as I have over the last few minutes, I don't mean that we are zero basing everything and starting from the ground up. There are many, many opportunities for us to improve what we do by looking at those who are getting things right. And there are many people who are getting things right. So I would suggest that when you look at yourself, and if you're taking that critical inward look, or if you're examining a process in your organization, don't think that you need to reinvent the wheel. You're just starting to do things slightly differently. And I would look at organizations that are excelling. And I mean, I'm in a holiday town at the moment, and just after a week, I've seen very, very different approaches to how people have come out and managed themselves during the holiday season. And that tells me an incredible amount of what people are actually getting right and where others are failing. So looking inward is great, but I think let's look outside, and who can we emulate? Who can we learn from? And let's look at those mentorship programs and other aspects that we can bring into the category of doing new things. I think also what you need to do is, when people embark on a learning experience and failure is a part of that process, you need to keep them motivated, because most people will go home feeling demoralized, like they're not achieving, like they're vulnerable in their jobs. And I think rather than just talking about those things, if we're driving it from the top, motivation is an element that I would think of and focus on quite strongly as well. And in looking at new talent, what we need to do is identify the people who have a curious nature, people, pardon me, who are also interested in learning new things, and who have the ability to adapt very quickly in a learning working environment. Because remember, while we're doing all of this, our companies and our doors are not closed. We're required to pay bills. We're required to satisfy customer needs if we are businesses. And we're required to continually operate in a very challenging environment at the moment. And at this point in the process, what starts to happen is we feel almost like there's a spotlight on us, because doing all of this requires that we take a very honest look. These are business values that were not explored in the past. that we are transparent in what we do. Also something that specifically in South Africa, businesses are not used to doing. They're very closed in the way that they do things, very hierarchical, um, and you have these silos in organizations where it's us and them in many, many organizations. I would dread to think what it's like in the power utilities and big companies in our country. And then finally, what you have is an openness that is required, where you are prepared to share ideas that may in the past have been frowned upon or even labeled as silly. And to people who are afraid of expressing their creativity, I always use one example. Um, I'm not sure that many of you have used it, but there's a product in the DIY category of products called paint remover. And not many people know how paint remover was invented. Years ago at Plascon in the US, one of the problems the organization faced is that in order to repaint a home, they needed to get the old paint off first because the paint wouldn't have the adhesion quality required. And their engineers just couldn't get things right. And what that started to do was impact on their sales, and their sales of new paint started to decline. So they decided to have a few focus groups, and they invited different peoples from different industries. And one of the people in one of these groups was a housewife. And during the session, she blurted out, well, if you need to get the paint off the wall, why don't you put dynamite on the wall and blow the paint off? I mean, it's a ridiculous idea because it would blow the entire house apart. But what that did was it started a train of thought that turned things around, and that said to the engineers, maybe in order to get the paint off, we need to put something onto the wall rather than the way we've been thinking about how we get it off. And then the thinking moved, and the R&D department got involved, and they looked at applying something to the wall that made the paint fleck off and leave the wall bare so that you could repaint it. So it's a simple idea. Housewife would have been fired if she was an employee of Plascon, but she managed to change the entire industry. And we now have a range of products which we continue to benefit from many, many years later. So don't be afraid in this openness to share your ideas, to express yourself, and to cultivate a culture that says, okay, you know, that sounds a bit silly, but let me write it down. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. And that might change the direction in which an organization moves. So in encouraging the openness, the transparency, and also the honesty required to be productive in companies today, I think what we also need to look at is company hierarchies, because we tend to be a hierarchically structured species where, you know, we always take some solace in the fact that we've got a boss or someone that we can complain to or take our problems to. But these concepts that I'm putting forward now work better in flat structures. So I think in anything that we build, whether it's little project teams that do work, little teams that go into an organization that look to introduce change, let's keep those structures flat and let's keep them flexible and fluid, because those are the conditions required for us to be able to be successful at it. I think from a personal point of view, it requires in an organization, in a family environment as well, it requires that we listen actively. The paint idea may have sounded stupid, but let's take the concept and let's unpack it and see what did she actually mean. So let's look at things, let's embrace everything that comes forward, and then let's review in a very critical way thereafter. And then the final aspect about the business part today, and it affects us in a personal way too, is that we need to cultivate ego-free environments. So there's just no place for egos today. You're going to be very embarrassed if you come up with something that you are convinced is the right way to do something in an environment as challenging as the one we have today. So I think the takeaway from the last few paragraphs is when we evaluate success is to look at how the success was achieved rather than what was achieved. The process is the important thing, and that is what we're trying to learn from. And you'd be forgiven for asking, why do we need to do these things? Why can't we just continue to do things the way we've always done them? And the reason is, to my mind, we have a new generation that is coming into the work environment, the new young emerging professionals who are qualifying, and I'm very conscious of the fact that we almost have a changing of the guard in our entire society today, where you have the old people, and I would include myself in them, and a younger group of people coming in. And they have very, very different ideas. They have very different ways of doing things. They have very different expectations. For example, I was discussing with one of our engineers at an internet company that I worked for. And he said to me one day at breakfast, we were in KZN overseeing the SA Open Golf. And he said to me, Farouk, management sometimes mistakes the passion we have for our jobs with the passion we have for working for the company we are at. They're just very, very different people. If you look at people like Greta, who's taking on the environmental problems, and other young people who have come in, they just do things very differently, and they require that we think differently and that we support them in their initiatives. Because I take a very, very bleak view. We've landed the new generation in a mess. We've given them problems because of the way in which we've lived, the way in which we've thought and acted in the past. And I think it's only fair that when we engage the younger generation, it's in a supportive role. So if you look, there are certain trends that have come out of the pandemic era, whether these be in real estate, whether it's elderly people moving out of cities to go and live in smaller places, or younger professionals who are now able to work from home. One of the things that I've been engaged with in the last few weeks, because I've moved house and I've moved into a new town, is I've questioned everything. When I walked into a new home and it has 2 bedrooms and a huge lounge, and I thought to myself, well, I need furniture. The immediate thought is, you need a couch, you need a dining room suite, you need a double bed, you need to... No, you don't. Rethink all of those things. Think about the appliances that you buy. Think about the furniture that you're using. Think about the materials that you are spending money on. And look at ways in which we can engage with the younger people in a slightly different way that allows them to introduce the change that is required and to support them in their efforts to bring about their change. Because there are many people in the age group of, I'd say, 60 and above, who will remain wishful. They just cannot change, or they don't want to change, but are also a part of this process. So what we've got to do is look at how we can be active participants, whether it's in a small role or in a larger one. But I think it's very important that we look at that. The starting point of this was to do things differently and to have the courage in order to do them. And I'd like to talk about how we cultivate that courage as I conclude this session and we get into some questions. The first thing is, I think you need to be thoughtful and you need to be very deliberate. And that's where the meditative part of it comes in. There's a lot of reflection that is required because you can't just bring about change without any self-awareness. So that's the second issue. And you need to understand that we have an open channel to the divine. And when we talk about the source of power, whether that is to accommodate, to cooperate, to collaborate, or even just to tolerate, I think we need to realize that those powers don't come from things, don't come from people, don't come from jobs, because those are all the things that we've lost over the last 2 years. We've lost people we love. We may have been energized by them. We've lost jobs where we thought we got security from. We've been thrust into environments where we get told, wear this, don't do this, touch this, do this, wash your hands, etc., etc. And our lives have been completely turned upside down. So I think one of the things that we need to do is take a very critical look at the way we think and even the way we meditate. Because in the past, we may have been doing certain things in a certain way. It worked, and I'll concede to that as well. But now, I think for us to engage in a kind of process of thinking that says, well, you know, it worked in the past, how do I get it to work again? And to try that, I think, is a futile exercise. What we need to do is embark on constructively and very positively trying these new things. And what has helped me personally is knowing where the power or the source of power for all of those things we require exists. I know where to tap into that. Very, very important to us. And then I think in conclusion, I think whether we are embracing change, resisting it, or trying to initiate it, we need that power to be able to withdraw at all times. We may not be able to have the time to meditate for 45 minutes or half an hour. We require 3 minutes here or 5 minutes there when we have that opportunity. So these powers allow us, I think, to be able to recharge on the go. That for me is important. I remember when I learned to meditate, Devendra counted the years, I can't remember how long ago it was. And everything was about the meditation, what happened in the time you were meditating. And as you grow a little and you begin to understand and listen to some of the senior people and more experienced people talk, the meditation then becomes about the time between the times you meditate. And that was another huge learning experience for me. And I think today, the entire story is about how we integrate that into one continuous string, where there's an awareness all the time, there's the power to withdraw, ground yourself, and all the time an understanding of the change that we need to bring about. So it's not just a question of setting objectives, setting goals. It's a question of asking, what goals do we need to set? What change do we want to bring about? How do we do it is what we've been discussing today. So I hope this has been useful for you. And I hope that it takes your thought in new directions, because like you, I also have that feeling. There was a time, you know, when I was much younger where you think, oh, in 5 years, I want to do this. in 10 years, I want to do that. We're going to extend our home or build a pool or buy a new car. Very honestly, I can't see 3 years ahead. 3 years for me is extremely long term. And there was a time a year ago where I couldn't see 6 months ahead. That's how volatile things were. So I think when we embark on this process, there has to be an understanding that the time is now. There's no time to plan to do something in the future. There's time to do it now. So the planning, the meditation, and all of that has just been compressed into one tight little ball. And I think we need to embrace it. We need to go forward. And we need to understand that we have the power internally to be able to achieve all of those things that require our attention or action at the moment. And that's where I'd like to leave today's sessions. And I hope we can go into a few discussions around any questions or issues anyone would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Farooq. And so to our audience, I'm sure you were listening very attentively, and as Farooq was going through the various pointers, you might have some questions in mind, wanting further clarification on something. Maybe you want to personalize something, see how it actually relates to you. So now this is your opportunity. You are free to unmute and ask your question, or if you'd prefer to, you can type it out in the chat box. I'll give you a few moments to gather your thoughts, and then
Devendri,
yes,
can I
hi.
say, great, just to start off, thank you so much, Farooq. I think, I like the perspective that you're saying, we need to be agile and adaptable with this uncertain times. And it's not a question, but I think it's just a comment, because you're giving us a new perspective of looking at things. And we need to reflect on this. And then from there, we will get, the direction that we need to. And yes, in the beginning we won't have all the answers. We will make mistakes, and that's through the learning we will grow. So I just wanted to say thank you for, because initially the topic was planning objectives, you're going to achieve it, but it's like growing from whatever you decide that you want to do. So yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and also the understanding that objectives can change. You might set an objective or have a personal goal, something you'd like to achieve today, you can change it tomorrow. It might not be relevant anymore. So that is also something that I think we need to have as part of our attitude looking forward.
I actually find that very interesting, because it's quite a refreshing approach. How are you able to discern when something's not relevant and to shift focus? Because I know, well, for myself, if I've invested a lot of time and energy in something, for the sake of having invested so much time and energy, I kind of hold on to things. And that, I think, might cloud my judgment as to whether it's really relevant or not anymore.
Even that's true. I think there are two elements. I mean, all of us tend to invest a little ego, even if it's just a tiny amount, into what we do. So there's an awareness around that. And whether we like it or not, we attach ourselves to anything that we want to do. So that detachment, in business terms, I would call it a disengagement rather than a detachment. But to work with something as if it has its own identity and to give it its own, like you'll often hear people say a company has its own identity. So the things that we do, the projects, we must give the space to learn and adapt and grow as well, and see ourselves as facilitators rather than conductors, trying to get whatever we want out of it.
It's a very, very nice way of looking at it. I mean, I didn't relate it to ego, but now as you're speaking, I can actually see how that holding on is because of this like over-identification with whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Anyone else would like to share a comment or a question? You can also feel free to type it out in the chat. Okay, we have a question on the chat box here from Malandela. As old people, we have invested time on certain approaches. What makes us discern the correctness or not of youth approaches?
It's a very, very interesting question. Thank you. And I think in all that I have just said, in no way did I mean to imply that there's no wisdom in our elders. But I think often our elders have not had the space to be able to practice and impart that knowledge like we've been able to do in the past. Life has changed completely today that, the moment you get to a certain age, you're not perceived as valuable anymore. So that knowledge is not rewarded. You put aside and, it's now make way for the new kids on the block. So I think how we call on that wisdom and how we determine is very, very difficult for me to understand. Firstly, because I don't think I'm at that age where I've got anything of value to impart down to a new generation. But what I do have is the wealth of experience that the youth don't have. And for me, what that says is I'm able to take a critical look at myself and say, yes, I made a mistake there. 10 years ago, I shouldn't have done that. 15 years ago, I made a wrong turn, or I shouldn't have gone down that path. And I think if you have sufficient courage to take that internal look and say, this is where I am right now, then the wisdom comes out automatically. You don't even have to impart it. It's like you're broadcasting it and people just receive it. Because when you impart that knowledge, people are much more receptive, because it's not like you're trying to tell somebody what to do, or it's an old way versus a new way or anything. But I think it's an awareness of yourself and an awareness of what the key challenges facing us as a society are today. So we can't just go around, I use the word pointing, because otherwise we are just as wishful. I wish the young people would behave differently or think differently. It's not that at all. We need to look at how we can play a role, and that too requires a lot of learning and trial and error on our side. If I just look, I've got daughter and granddaughter, and the space between myself and my daughter is doing that, and the space between myself and my granddaughter is completely out of the picture. I mean, they are just a different species. You try and conduct a chat with one of them over WhatsApp, and they talk in emoji, so forget about expression and do you respect your elders by talking in a certain way, and all of that has just been thrown out. So we're required to relearn as elders a lot of what we've learned as well. Difficult question to answer.
Hi, I'm Shobha, and I can identify with what you just mentioned now because I'm 70 years old and I lost my daughter 5 years ago. So I am bringing up my two grandchildren. One is 17 and one is 15. But fortunately, I'm a retired educator and I always work with teenagers. It was a huge adjustment, but we have seemed to sort of draw a little balance, a good balance in our lives, where we accept each other's ideas. I have learned a lot to adapt my line of thinking. And obviously, I welcome change because change is the only thing that's permanent in our lives. And I am actually in a very good space because I feel technically also I have learned tremendously and I've learned it from them. The EFTs and all the emails and everything that goes with it. So I have benefited a lot and they have benefited a lot because I can see that they are growing into very responsible adolescents. And they go to the meditation center, we do our meditation. There's no compulsion on either side, but we have very good cooperation, very, very good. So as you mentioned that age doesn't matter, we need to accept the now moment. And we need to welcome any change that is happening at the moment and to adapt ourselves and go with that. Thank you.
I agree. That's, I think the two things that you mentioned, Shobha, the adapting and the accepting are two very important components. We need to accept that they are different to us. And it's not a question of we have, they don't have, or we know, they don't know. But I think the two are quite harmonious when, as you describe, you are flexible in your thinking and are able to adapt. And you are loving enough to be able to exercise that little bit of effort to find out and understand a little bit more. I think it was one of Kavi's habits, seek to understand first before trying to make yourself understood. And I think that's very, very important and is the answer to that harmony between the two generations. Is in many ways, they have a lot of newness, which we can benefit from. And they are also lacking in a lot of the old values-based thinking that we have. And if we can infuse that in a way which is slightly differently presented to them, I think you've got a great formula there, and I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you. And I think Zara raised her hand and has something to share. Zara, go ahead.
Thank you, sister. I'm Shanti, brother.
Shanti.
I want to understand where your train of thought was going when you said that we need to look at things differently. Like when you were looking at a place to stay, you know, you go into a 2-bedroom home and you say, okay, maybe I don't need that dining table. Maybe I don't need that lounge. I didn't quite follow the train of thought you were inviting. And I wonder whether it was actually one of interdependence, seeing the circumstances of the world that we live in now, with overpopulation, climate change, the global challenges, whether instead of, like you say, the thing is to look outwards and let other people know that we are visibly there for them. And have that independence to say, okay, who might have that dining furniture that, you know, I can buy from instead of a bigger store or whatever it is. But rather let me put the question back to you and ask you, what was your train of thought when you were doing your exercises and going into looking for a place for yourself?
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. I think it's, I brought that up, I think, for two reasons. is one, I've been terribly uncomfortable, not unhappy, uncomfortable where I've lived for the last 4 years. It's been extremely cold, and the winters have been harsh and unforgiving. And winters have been my most unproductive part of the year. And each time we get to spring, I say to myself, I don't want to spend another winter here. So finally, I think it took me 4 years, I decided you should move to a subtropical climate. You're obviously unhappy here because of the weather for whatever reason, and it may relate to climate change or anything. And the realization that I had at the time is I should move. I'm not a tree. So it was not warm your house up or buy a heater or another this or electric blanket, or how do you address the problem that you have. But I decided to take a drastic move. And when I did, what that allowed me to do was rethink other things in my life as well. I'll give you a silly example. One of the things on my shopping list was a double bed to go into the master bedroom. I mean, you don't have to think about it. That's what all houses have. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to sleep with anyone. Why do I need a double bed? I need a bed that I'll be comfortable on. And that's all I need. So I rethought even the size of the bed, and I'm having a custom bed made for me out of something that I'm upcycling from used pallets. So my train of thought was to say, we can either come through this pandemic waiting for things to return to normal. We'd be in the category of those who watch things happen. Or we can be in a category of people that saying, well, let me do things slightly differently. Let me change things. Let me look at another way, or let me look at the problem from a different angle. And there are many people who are having that discussion in their minds about whether they need a car. We grow up in South Africa, and you go to school, you go to university, you qualify, you buy a house, you buy a car, or you get married, or whatever. That's a natural progression. No, that line doesn't exist in reality. Why do we need a vehicle? You go to India and you spend 3 months there and you don't need a car, but there's just too many on the road. And I would hate to drive in India. And after 2 or 3 days, you realize, well, if I stand on that corner, I'll get a little tuk-tuk. And if I want to go a little further, I'll get a taxi. And after 6 months, you learn all the tricks. So if I want to take a train from here to here and that station is very busy, well, maybe I'll go there in the opposite direction, get onto that station and then go there. All things that we can do differently if we take off our hats that say, this is the way we think, that's the way we've always done things. So I think it was just an example that I used to say, you can question everything right now, because what the pandemic has done is reset the world for us. A customer is no longer just a customer. A wholesaler or a retailer is no longer just a wholesaler. There are people who are looking at shopping differently. I was absolutely amazed in the tiny little town that I lived in. As we went into the pandemic, I used to order things from Amazon and a few other places, and couriers used to arrive every now and then. I think when I left in December, there were at least 5 or 6 courier companies that were delivering daily to that little town, because people are buying things like dog food online. And that raises a whole lot of other problems. You know, do you want a special delivery from a large town to a small town with a little bag of dog food? There are environmental costs and all sorts of other issues. So I think it's not only the willingness to think things through, to think things differently, but to evaluate them in a different way as well. And to say what's more effective, what's more efficient, and then to come out of that with the solution that maybe better serves you or better solves a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to highlight one more comment that we received from Usha Marie. Thank you so much for excellent session. Learned the importance of being patient for the process. Work instead of expecting instant results. Well presented, and thank you so much. God bless. We have time to take one or two more questions. So is there anyone that would like further clarification or?
Om Shanti, Sister Divendri.
Yes, hello.
I'm Eva. Thank you, brother, for your insightful talk.
Eva, we can't really hear you. Can you repeat?
Okay, all right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I especially enjoyed brother's talk when he brought out the divinity and the meditation practices that he uses in his everyday tasks. So that was very good. What I wanted to bring out is that we've always been exposed to success and failure from the time we were little, growing up. So everything that we did, we were exposed to that in our lives. Actually, at this stage of life, when we look at our work environment, yes, we do work in silos, especially when we are in a hierarchical sort of environment and organizations. And with the pandemic, what has happened is that lots of people have actually left companies or actually passed on. And so we found that lots of skills are being diminished. In saying that, also, I think one of the important things in an environment such as that, or any organization for that matter, it is communication that actually brings on the success. Because if we not being, vocal about what we're doing and we're remaining in silos, and then we're not going to be given of the creative ideas that we want to bring out in the organization or situations in life, even the family for that matter. So I think for me, creativity and communication are big parts of success in the work and family environment. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you. Very constructive comment.
Thank you, Eva. Is there anyone else before we move into the next part of our program? Any further comments or questions? Okay, we're going to go into a meditation experience now, but Farooq, before we go into the meditation, is there anything that you would want to say in conclusion or to round up?
Thanks, Steven. No, I think just thank you for giving me the opportunity. The opportunity for me to talk is often an opportunity for me to learn and listen to myself and learn from the experience as well. Because, you know, many of us, I think, are very good at dispensing with information and advice and all of those things, but not as good as heeding them, even if it's our own words. So I think it was a good time for me to just go through that process in kind of getting my thoughts aligned. And I've got a tough year ahead, and I've got a lot of focusing and planning and doing to do as well.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm glad that it was a two-way benefit. And this last aspect that you highlighted of that even this was your opportunity to learn, for me, overall from this presentation, it was my takeaway. Your emphasis on really just being open to learning and embracing everything as a learning opportunity at every moment. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Farooq, would you please share your email address on the chat? Would you be able to type it out so that everyone gets a hold of it? And so if they wish to contact you and request for the notes or communicate in the future, then they have access
Yes,
to.
with pleasure.
That's great. Okay.
Done.
So there you have a very simple email, Gmail address. You won't forget it, farooqwaja at gmail.com. That's wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Farooq. And now I would like to invite all of you to journey with me as we go into meditation. Taking this moment just observe the vast landscape of my entire world and my life as I know it. I allow my mind to sweep over all of the many things that are so important to me, be it on a personal level, within the home and family, certain relationships, be it my field of work. I take a step back as an observer and I just watch this landscape in front of me. And I ask myself, who is the master? In this moment, I reflect. Am I being pushed and pulled and tossed and swayed by the various comings and goings and changes that are constantly occurring in this landscape? Or am I the one who's stable and confident, understanding the perfect way to adapt, to adjust, to respond, and to navigate every scene that may appear in front of me. Within myself, I understand that there's enormous creative potential. Pure, big heart and a clear, calm mind. I am able to humble myself and allow all of the different aspects of this landscape to become my teacher, to make me into that ever inquiring, ever learning, ever growing student of life. And with this approach, I have the quiet hope that the will to succeed will surely open the door to many successful steps to take. Focused steps, determined steps, realistic steps, but powerful steps nonetheless. And I can see how all of this will enable me to maintain my seat of self-respect as the master of my own destiny, no longer the victim of circumstances. All I want for myself, for those around me, and for the world at large is that we live with this quality of life, and holding this vision so close to my heart, I have the quiet assurance that nothing that I do is done alone. Nothing that I accomplished was entirely my own achievement. There's a quiet presence, an observant eye on me, a canopy of protection over me, a big heart embracing me. I know that wherever there is a pure intention and a benevolent aim, that great one, that divine source, is my one strength and one support. Take these few moments quietly to just enjoy the feeling. Being in the presence of this divine love and light. So once again, a very special thank you to our presenter Farooq for sharing his insights with us and enriching us with those new concepts. And a big thank you to all of you for choosing to spend your afternoon with us in this learning and growing process. Best wishes to you for the year ahead. Thank you very, very much. And before we draw this program to a conclusion, I think our host has a few announcements of forthcoming programs, so some information will be screened with the login details of our forthcoming programs. So thanks to all of you, and please take care. Bye-bye.